All right, let's talk Atlanta Falcons. Kind of a quiet offseason, but if you discount everything with Kirk Cousins, which is still waiting to be resolved, it's actually been a pretty solid offseason for Atlanta, making some really smart, savvy moves. I think the addition of, for example, of Leonard Floyd into the fold, I think was a big move that not a lot of people are talking about, but it looks like the Falcons may not be done. In fact, they'd be connected to an absolutely massive trade. We'll get to that in 1 second, but first, I'm Nick, that's Andrew, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection. All right, the Atlanta Falcons earlier this offseason have made a number of really solid moves, nothing that really dominated the headlines, and we covered it at the time, but the Falcons have done a really good job just finding ways to improve their roster and address their needs. But there's now been a recent report that the Falcons may be gearing up for their biggest move yet in terms of trying to improve one of their biggest weaknesses. Let's get into the article, then we'll talk about it more in detail on the other side. This is courtesy of Athlon Sports. According to Jeff Benedict, a former 92.9 radio host and trusted Falcons insider, Atlanta has contacted the New York Jets about trading for the number 7 pick in the 2025 NFL Draft. The move would allow them to draft Jalon Walker, a talented linebacker from Georgia they've been keeping a close eye on. I'm told Falcons have reached out to Jets to swap 7 and 15 as they eye Jalon Walker, Benedict shared. Front office wants to make a splash with pass rush and feels that Parsons is no longer attainable. Talk about Micah Parsons. He added, with Saints and Panthers both needing pass rush, Falcons want to beat them to Walker. If a trade happens, it'll be a draft night situation, and more than likely means they also give up a 2026 first as well, showing how much Atlanta wants to land their guy. All right, so big caveats here, of course. We're dealing with a sort of fog of war situation, a lot of rumor mills going along. How good of a source is Benedict in this situation? A lot of question marks here, a lot of things to have to digest. Like, any team could be leaking this out, agents could be leaking this out. It's really hard to figure out exactly what's going on here. So, big caveat there. But I think it's a very interesting, a very realistic opportunity for the Falcons to trade up. We all know what happened last year. A lot of people were thinking they'd go Jared Verse. They decided to go Michael Penix Jr. Honestly, I think it was the right move in the future. Terry Fontenot's been clearly vindicated, in my opinion, but they still have to address the edge rusher and defense long term. And it looks like, based on this reporting, if you take it for what it's worth, they're planning to do that in a big way. All right, Miles, I know you've got a lot of thoughts and a lot of great data on this, but first, Falcons fans, in the comment section below, who's one player you want the Falcons to draft if they have to trade up to get him, or if they pick him, they trade back to get him, at whatever it may be. Who do you want the Atlanta Falcons to draft in the first round, regardless of position, right? If you're willing to give up next year's first to move up to get him, for example, in the case of Jalon Walker, or just sit tight or trade back, whatever the circumstance, give the one player you want the Atlanta Falcons to draft. Put them in the comment section below. But Miles, over to you now. Excuse me. What are your thoughts on this potential move and just all things Atlanta Falcons?
Yeah, Nick, I think the what you brought up first is the key here to show getting of Michael Penix Jr. last year by the Falcons shows that in the first round, they're willing to be aggressive in one way or another, whether they think they have a guy that they want. In that case, Michael Penix Jr. being available, they go out and they grab their guy at quarterback. Now, this year, I think these rumors, like we said, these are rumors. How good of a source Benedict is, I'm not 100% sure, but it makes a whole lot of sense. There are some things I really like about it, but there's also some things that I disagree with that will be beneficial to the Falcons as well. But getting Jalon Walker, I think, first of all, let's cover that. This would be a major upgrade to this Atlanta team. So I think on paper, it makes a lot of sense to want to go after this guy, because if we pull up this graph, we're going to see where the Atlanta Falcons defense was the most deficient last season, and that was in two categories in particular. That was pass rush grade, which they were 30th in the NFL, and then that was their tackling grade, that they were also 30th in the NFL. And so when you're looking at a guy to bring into this defense to make instant impact, you have to have a guy, surefire tackler, great at the pass rush, and he's got to be able to do everything else at least decently as well if you're going to trade up. And this is exactly what Jalon Walker does. In that aspect, you see the Falcons last year, 59 pass rush grade, but you look at Jalon Walker, 83 pass rush grade last season at Georgia, playing some of the top competition in all of college football. Then you look at the tackling grade, Falcons, 33.3 tackling grade last year by them. Jalon Walker, 75 tackling grade last season by him. So he brings a lot of what the Falcons have been missing on defense as far as where his best points of his game were last season. But another thing that I think is very interesting is if you look around and you look at, that old Jimmy Johnson draft chart that kind of shows how each pick is graded and they give it a numerical value. If you look at what the Falcons' first round pick and their second round pick are weighted as versus the New York Jets' first round pick, that number 7 overall pick, I think this article may be a little bit off base. This insider might be off base as far as saying they also need to trade next year's first round pick as well. I think if you look at it, the New York Jets number 7 pick is about a 1,500 points given to it, where the Atlanta Falcons 15th overall pick is 1,050, and their number 46 overall second round pick is 440. So that gets them right 1,490 points right there. They're like, that's a pretty even trade. They may have to throw in, a later round pick, like 6th or 7th, like that, just to push the trade over the edge. But I think if they're able to get this move done, I don't think it's going to take another first as well. So I think that's another thing to take into consideration here for Falcons fans, that this seems like a good move. It seems plausible. It seems like a player who fits what the Falcons need. But I think the reports about them also having to add in that 2026 first round pick as well, a little bit overblown. I think they could possibly get it done for less than that. And that's why I think this would be a really, really good move for the Falcons. So we all saw the reports. Falcons owner coming out saying obviously defense is going to be their biggest, focus in this draft. This makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of rumors, a lot of, Nick said fog of war, draft time type of stuff going on. You don't know what you can trust. But on paper, the moves make sense. Jalon Walker fits where the Falcons were deficient last year, and the Falcons have some good draft capital that I think would allow them to make this trade as well.
Yeah, and it's not just the capital, it's not just the need by the Falcons. I think it's also a fit thing when you look at Jalon Walker, because if you look at every single scouting profile, almost to a T, they all say incredible athlete, phenomenal tools, outstanding upside, not ready to be an every down edge rusher, edge defender in the National Football League, more of a hybrid defender to come in, maybe run off ball linebacker in early downs, become a pass rusher in later downs, which kind of fits exactly where the Falcons are structured, right? They already have 2 edge defenders, right? They, of course, have Ebiketie, a solid young player. They went out and got Leonard Floyd, who I already mentioned. If you look at the linebacker position, they added Divine Diablo, one of the more underrated moves any team has made this offseason. And then, of course, you look at the other linebacker, you've got Ellis, and I think J.D. Bertrand, who, as a depth piece, special teams guy, I think he does some good things as well. I'm not saying he's a star, but I think he's a kind of underrated depth piece on this defense. So you look at their traditional setup in terms of their interior linebackers and their edge defenders, they don't need Walker to come in and play a traditional role here. You're just bringing in Jalon Walker to basically be a playmaker, kind of a guy you move all over the place, right? Listen, if it's 3rd and 8, be a pass rusher. If it's 1st and 10, help us stop the run, and we'll use you for 30, 40, 50% of the snaps and just make you just a game wrecker those times you're on the field. Now, it does make it a risky move, right? I think that's the one concern if you're Atlanta. You say, listen, if we draft a guy in the top 10, we'd like him to play more than, 50% of defensive snaps. But here is my one caveat to that, though. The Falcons are a talented team. We all know that. Everyone understands that. They have decent depth. Most positions, not perfect, but they have decent depth. If you look at where the Falcons have been missing, mainly on defense the past few years, it's playmakers. It's guys who can force those key fumbles, get those batted balls, get those big sacks and big moments, those big tackle for losses, right? They've got a lot of good. They've got a lot of solid. They've got a lot of very respectable, savvy guys who can do a good job in defense. They don't have guys that can wreck an opposing game plan. They just haven't had that tool in a very long time. I mean, what, Vic Beasley, maybe the last time they've had an edge rusher that can do something to that level. And I think you look at a guy like Walker as a guy who's the prototypical definition of a game wrecker, right? He can play off ball linebacker with enough strength and support to blow up fullbacks and running backs and cover them. But you give him a sort of select pass rush situations, offensive linemen, guards, centers, tackles, he can beat them as long as he doesn't have to do it play in and play out and get worn down over the course of a game. He has a chance, Jalon Walker, with the right team to be just the ultimate game wrecker. There's very few teams, however, that have the depth essentially defensively to support that. Atlanta's basically the only one. So if you look at the fit for Walker, you look at the fit for the Falcons, it just makes a lot of sense. And now you've got the rumor mill flying around about the Falcons trading into the top 10. in terms of what they'd have to give up, I agree with you. The value chart kind of aligns. They wouldn't have to give up next year's first. But on a base principle level, if you gave up next year's first and you traded this year's first, swapped it with the Jets to get 7 and got Walker, and Michael Penix Jr. got better, let's be totally honest here. You're probably not drafted into like 22 or later anyway in 2025. So the question becomes, if you worry about your future first round draft picks, how about you get good enough where that first round draft pick falls all the way to the back end of the first round? And I think that's one of the things that's going on in Terry Fontenot's mind this offseason. Really, if you look at the moves they've kind of made, they're just trying to figure out what can we do to push ourselves over the edge. Because as disappointing as the Falcons finished last season, they were still 8-9, right? If they make a kick against Washington, they probably end up in the postseason, to be totally honest. What happens the last game of the season, I think they were just deflated at that point. But this is a playoff caliber team. We all understand that. They just need that one final push, whether it's Michael Penix Jr. becoming that elite quarterback that a lot of people, myself included, think he can be, whether it's adding a game wrecker on defense or ideally both. The Falcons are sort of the proverbial one piece away. It usually doesn't make sense, but Atlanta is actually the one of the few cases where they really are legitimately one piece away from being a serious playoff contender. That piece is a defensive playmaker. And look, Jalon Walker, that's him. So I think this deal makes a lot of sense for all parties involved. We'll have to see how it all shakes out. But I mean, if you look at the fit, you look at the numbers, like you bring up the data, like you said, it seems to just align perfectly for everyone.